So, and particularly the reason that a lot of those things are quite hard is there is a lot of jargon, there's a lot of unnecessary acronyms that sustainability uses. We're all, I'm very, I do that quite a lot. What we do have is a glossary page on the Green Future Leicestershire website, which hopefully breaks down a lot of those. One of those is the reporting acronyms, where you see a lot of these, ESG and what that means. It breaks down those reporting phrases for you. Also breaks down some sustainability and some carbon sort of just general jargon and phrases that are used about those kind of areas of learning. Just go through a couple of these sort of main ones for understanding the basics of the jargon. First one of those is climate change, essentially the long-term shift in temperature and weather patterns. The basic is the Earth is getting warmer due to human activities. And then you'll see GHGs as well alongside that. That's greenhouse gases, which are the gases that are in the Earth's atmosphere that trap the heat, causing the Earth to warm. A measure of those things is a carbon footprint. So carbon footprints are often something that comes up when you look at legislation and requirements for SMEs and for businesses and for individuals. Carbon footprint is the measure of the amount of gases that are released as a result of different activities, either as an action or production of a product. You can have carbon footprints of food, of items, of countries. People can have carbon footprints as well. In order to create a comparable measure of the impact of different activities, businesses will be required to provide carbon footprints. And to make that a robust process to be comparable across businesses, there was developed carbon scopes. So that's basically a way of categorizing different emissions for a company based on what it creates in its operations and other parts of its business. The carbon scopes that you'll see are broken down into 3 scopes. First one of those, scope 1, is from your gas and your fuel. Scope 2 is from your purchased electricity, and scope 3 is literally everything else. So it's everything that you buy and purchase, it's your transport, it's your waste, it's your investments. There's sort of a common process for how to break down your carbon emissions, and that's across those scopes. So you might see certain legislation being about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And then this phrase that often pops up, particularly from sort of government information, is decarbonisation, which is essentially just that process of reducing the greenhouse gases from the production of something or from a service. So it's being able to have a lower carbon footprint. And then net zero is another big one that you'll see as a kind of culmination of all of those, which is the overall balance between emitting and absorbing carbon in the atmosphere. And that's across all of those 3 scopes. What part of this is relevant for your business? Sustainability regulations are often pitched or understood at that level that it's just for large businesses, but actually what's really important is that SMEs are aware of these things and can actually get ahead of competitors by understanding these and getting on board with complying with these things as well. Sometimes ignoring these compliances could mean fines or losing out on businesses or funding opportunities, which has been really key for a lot of businesses that are coming to us. They're finding, and we're finding at the university, a lot of funding opportunities are requiring quite high levels of sustainability, either because they're coming from governments who have these targets for themselves to meet and are therefore pushing that onto their suppliers, or from other large organisations who need to meet these legislations and are requiring their supply chain to meet those as well. So I'm going to first talk you through some of the legislation that you sort of need to know as an SME. This is the part that kind of I've done my absolute best to break these down into really easy to understand and sort of key parts for you to take away. So these are the ones that we'll go through: some environmental compliance and then some kind of other compliance areas. And then I'll go on to what doesn't yet impact you, but what you might be able to learn from those as well. So in terms of the environmental compliance, some of the key ones, you've got environmental permitting regulation. I think if you know whether this impacts you, then it will be relevant for you. If you don't, if you're not part of a business that has the potential to cause this kind of major pollution or environmental harm, you won't be required to align with this. But if you do, then all it requires is sort of regular auditing and a couple of pollution control measures that are put into place on a local level. But I mean, these types of things are quite useful. What it talks about is knowing your impact and auditing your equipment and keeping your operations smooth, which is, a very useful thing to do. But if you don't have this major pollution, then this kind of environmental compliance won't be relevant for your business. And then some other compliance, I think this energy performance certificates, and for sort of tracks your energy performance of different buildings. There's a couple of things with this that have come in quite recently, that commercial buildings must have an EPC of at least an E. So either if you own your building or even if you rent it, this is true for you. So they have to be, less than 10 years old. You can go onto a public record on epcchecker.com on the government, and there should be a public record of every EPC. So you can have a look if your owned or rented building has one of these. And commercial ratings must have an EPC of at least E. They're rated on an A to F basis. There are plans at the moment to raise this to a C requirement by 2027 because there's been minimum energy efficiency standards that have been brought in by the government. So if you're below a C, it's worth having a look at those recommendations that are given on that certificate to help raise you up to a C by 2027. And there is also further plans following these kind of stricter energy efficiency scheme requirements. There's further plans to raise this to a minimum of a B by 2030. That's not set in stone at the moment, but it's also very important to sort of be aware that increasing efficiency of buildings is something that's going to be required for all owned and rented properties. So speak to your landlord or have a look at that EPC. What it does do is it gives you really good suggestions, and they're a kind of prompt of evidence informed changes that you can make. So you're not sort of starting from nothing with that. There'll be recommendations on that certificate for how you can improve to those higher grades. What doesn't, and I've put here in brackets, yet impact you, are some of these regulations that are required of large organisations. But like I explained, some of those, again, are being pushed on smaller organisations. So it's still worth you definitely sort of being aware of these, and actually maybe being able to take inspiration from these for sort of best practice for how to deal with certain things. I'd say a lot of them, you've got here a lot of brackets, a lot of them are acronyms, which I have explained in the glossary that Alina has stuck in the chat and that you can find on the Greener Future Leicestershire website, and I'll kind of talk you through those as well. So some of these things are about carbon and energy compliance. That tends to be, a couple of these first ones. So the Companies Act from 2006 requires large organisations, so quoted companies, large organisations that are on the stock exchange. It requires compulsory carbon emissions reporting across only that scope 1 and 2 area. So only the energy and fuel and the purchased electricity. So it tends to be things you can find on your bills and quite easily provide information for. And that requires annual reporting of at that level from large organisations. Scope 3 at the moment, which is where it is in your supply chain, is voluntary, but that's only at the moment. Because governments need to meet those 2050 net zero targets, a lot of how we meet net zero, because that's across scopes 1, 2 and 3, how we meet net zero as an entire country does often sit in that business supply chain piece. So as we get closer to 2050, the government who are putting these acts in place are going to require large organisations to provide mandatory scope 3 reporting. There's a lot of also kind of financial compliance areas for large organisations. What you might see is this corporate social responsibility directive. I think corporate social responsibility has been a phrase that's been used for a long time, but this CSRD, this directive, has come in only in the past couple of years, and it requires large organisations to do really comprehensive reports that detail their emissions, the risks of sustainability for their organisation, what the opportunities are, what high-level strategies they have to put these in place, and what their targets are and how they're going to meet those. And that actually requires them to look across the environmental impact for their organisation. But because it's this CSR link, it's actually also the social impact for their organisation and the governance area of how they manage those risks and strategies and opportunities and how that's embedded in their business. And then there's a couple I wanted to mention here for standards and kind of voluntary frameworks that are not required of anybody, but are maybe things that you'll come across that are useful to see. So the International Sustainability Standards Board is essentially sort of best practice on sustainability reporting, because there's so many different, you've seen here, there's so many different sustainability areas, whether it's environmental, whether it's social, whether it's governance, and there's so many different, whether it's carbon or it's waste, or it's on the finance side and the claim side, there's lots of different areas. And so we're finding a lot of organisations across the UK, lots of organisations are being required to provide lots of different reports for lots of different standards for lots of different areas of their supply chain. There's a number of different things that are required. So as a way to sort of streamline that, the International Standards Sustainability Standards Board has brought in a sustainability baseline that looks at risks, governance, strategy and target management across all of those different areas and tries to provide one framework for it. I'd say it is quite detailed. It's something that if you were a large organisation that needed to manage a lot of these, you would use this. But I do think it's quite useful to pull parts from about the kind of the pillars of what sustainability reporting could cover. And actually, I think it's very useful for the sector in general to have a look at using one baseline. And hopefully this has only just been produced. And you can see a lot of sustainability regulation is very recent and, changing frequently. This has only just been produced, but I think it presents a nice opportunity for reporting to be streamlined slightly. If you were looking for something that was larger than just the carbon reduction plan, this is sort of what I'd refer you to look at so that you can cover all of those bases at once and not have to redo everything each stage that you want to report to. But for SMEs, often a carbon reduction plan is comprehensive enough and you wouldn't need to do something that's at this level. So I know that's quite a lot of legislation that I've just talked you through. It's very difficult to make that engaging, but I've broken it down as best I can to fully look at kind of what's required of you, what reporting there is for SMEs and other organisations. A couple of other things I wanted to pull, which, like I said, I'll send you this afterwards so you'll have access to them all, and I think Alina's been putting them in the chat, is the PPN 0621, the template for that. The 1.5 degree business playbook has also got really useful framework for actions in there for an organisation and really helps you look at how you can start to implement a strategy and a framework for sustainability within an organisation. And then we've got some of these high level targets mapped out, some of these net zero targets, the science-based targets, sustainable development goals, lots of these different things that you think, all of these different dates and acronyms and years, we've kind of broken those down into a bit of a framework for you there as well.